GoForThe2.com. We're into the Week 3 predictions for the college football season. Another great slate of action. It does not get better than this. Let's get right into the picks for this coming weekend. Florida travels to Lexington to take on a very emotional Kentucky Wildcat team. They got an emotional victory last week against South Carolina in Columbia, an SEC victory. They now come back home to face a very solid Gator team. Florida hasn't lost to Kentucky in 28 straight games. They got pushed to the limit last year in triple overtime before winning that ball game 36-30. But for me, this game comes down to the rushing defense of Kentucky. They're surrendering about 221 rushing yards per game. You look at Jim McElwain and that offense putting up numbers. They're averaging 192 rushing yards per game. I like the way the offensive line is playing. I like the way the defense is playing as well, only giving up 25 rushing yards throughout the first two games of the year. I know that Kentucky has two very solid running backs in Williams and JoJo Kemp, but I like the way the defense matches up, and I like the way Will Grier is playing within Jim McElwain's system, completing over 70% of his passes. I think Florida gets a very decisive victory this coming Saturday in Lexington. Another intriguing matchup is California travels to Austin to take on the Longhorns. Intriguing matchup. It's more of a cross-country trip for California. They're coming off a very emotional, dominating victory over San Diego State last week, dominating Jared Goff and those wide receivers, really putting a lot of pressure on opposing defenses. But I think this is a contrast in styles. When you look at it, Charlie Strong, this is going to be an offense that he's faced within the Big 12. I know they gave up a lot of yards to Notre Dame, but I don't look at that Week 1 effort. I think they made some adjustments in week number 2. They blew out Rice by 2 touchdowns last week. Looked very solid in my opinion. And I like Texas in this spot at home. I think Charlie Strong will have a great game plan in place, and look for Texas to run the football against a suspect front seven of California. I think to me that is the matchup. You look at the physicality of Texas on the offense and defensive sides of the ball going up against a finesse team in California. I like Texas at home in Austin. I don't think it's as high scoring as a lot of people think. I think Texas gets a 7-point victory. Think 34-27 over California this weekend. Another interesting SEC battle, Georgia, South Carolina. Game taking place in Athens. Last year, Georgia lost this ball game 38-35. They missed a field goal that had an opportunity to tie that ball game up. That possibly cost Georgia an opportunity to go to the playoffs. So that was a game early on that Georgia year in and year out struggles in. They're 1-4 against South Carolina over the last 5 years. But in 2 years ago in Athens, Georgia did get the 41-30 victory. Again, this is a South Carolina team, in my eyes, that's one-dimensional on the offensive side of the ball. Passing offense revolves solely around Pharaoh Cooper. Connor Mitch got hurt last week. Perry Orth will get the start. But this is a very physical defense in Georgia, giving up only 75 rushing yards per game. They're +4 in turnover margin. But more importantly, I look at the South Carolina defense. This is a defensive front that's given up 207 rushing yards per game. I look at Georgia's offensive line. They're averaging 264 rushing yards per game through the first 2 games of the season. I like Georgia at home in this spot. I think they'll be up for this matchup. Look for Grayson Lambert and those wide receivers, Malcolm Mitchell, Isaiah McKenzie, to get more involved. And I think Georgia gets a dominating performance at home, calling for a 42-17 victory by the Bulldogs this weekend in Athens. Another intriguing matchup, LSU and Auburn. Intriguing SEC West rivalry. Couple of things to keep in mind. This game is played at 3:30 in the afternoon. It's not a night game for the Tigers. There's a big discrepancy between day and night games in Death Valley. I don't put a lot of credence into that Week 2 performance against Jacksonville State. Auburn is 2-0. This game comes down to tempo for me. This was an Auburn team that played LSU very, very tough last year. They dominated the Tigers at home on the Plains, got the victory 41-7 over the LSU Tigers. You look at LSU last week, they gave up 335 passing yards to Dak Prescott and the Mississippi State Bulldogs. But I look at this defensive front, in my opinion, not as solid as they were a year ago under John Chavis. Last year, they gave up 153 rushing yards per game. That was LSU's highest total in terms of rushing defense over the last 5 years prior. So not the same defense that it was in previous years. This is a rivalry game. I think this game is very, very close. I think Auburn's in it from start to finish. In the end, though, I think LSU does get a 3-point victory, 23-20 at home in Death Valley, but it is very, very close. Another interesting matchup is Nebraska travels to Miami. Intriguing matchup. You look at this Nebraska secondary, giving up over 330 yards per game now through 2 ball games. You look at this Miami offense led by Brad Kaya, very explosive, dominant offense, and I like Joseph Yearby in this matchup to be utilized on linebackers and nickelbacks. Look for Al Golden and the coaching staff to get Yearby the football in the passing game. I like the way the offensive line is playing for Brad Kaya, and I think Miami gets a dominant home victory. This is a much-needed victory for Miami. They need a victory like this to propel their season. Last year, they dropped this ball game 41-31. Duke Johnson fumbled the ball late in that ball game that led to a Nebraska touchdown. This was a very close game last year. I expect Miami to be in this ball game from start to finish, and I think the Hurricanes get a 10-point victory at home. Think it's high scoring, calling for a 40-30 Miami Hurricane victory this Saturday afternoon. Marquee matchup Saturday night. Ole Miss travels to Tuscaloosa to face the Alabama Crimson Tide. Key SEC West battle. Ole Miss beat Alabama last year 23-17. They trailed that ball game 14-3 at half. You look at what they were able to do in that ball game. Evan Ingram, 71 receptions, 71 receiving yards in that matchup. He tore apart Landon Collins in that Alabama secondary late in that game. That allowed Bo Wallace and that offense to put up points and get the 23-17 victory. I look at the defensive front led by Robert Condici. I look at Chad Kelly as being the X factor in this matchup. I know Tunsil might not play, but in my opinion, I think it's the offensive weapons for Ole Miss that put a lot of pressure on Alabama. You look at this Ole Miss team, they threw to 14 different receivers so far this season. I think that's going to be added in this matchup. I think it's an added dimension for them and that offense and Chad Kelly, that he has a lot of different weapons. I look at Treadwell that comes back. He looks very strong. Stringfellow as well. And I expect Ole Miss to get this victory. It's not going to be easy. Ole Miss could be the only team since LSU to defeat Alabama in back-to-back years. Last time LSU did it, 2011, 2010. Ole Miss built very strong on the offensive and defensive lines. I like Hugh Freeze. I don't think Ole Miss will be intimidated by Alabama, and I think Ole Miss gets the victory Saturday night. I don't think it's high scoring as a lot of people think. I think it's 27-20. Ole Miss pulls out the victory in upset fashion. Another team I want to throw out there is NC State Old Dominion. NC State is my sleeper in the ACC this year. I have them second behind Clemson. I expect this team to be up. They get running back Thornton back from a 2-game suspension. Jacoby Brissett looks sharp early on. They have 4 or 5 starters back on the offensive line. He has all 4 leading receivers from 2014 back on that offense. This game was very close last year. NC State won it by 12 points, but I expect NC State to be focused. I expect them to be disciplined, and I expect NC State to get a dominant victory on the road. I think they put up a ton of points in this matchup. I think NC State throws up a 52 spot, calling NC State 52, Old Dominion 21. Stay with me all season long. You can listen to my radio show on Yahoo Sports Radio Network every Saturday morning, 10 a.m. through 11 a.m. Eastern Time at streamysr.com. College football is the best.